This is Journey with Care, the official podcast of Care Impact. Johan here, and today I will be your guide. Welcome to the special series, A Care Impact Christmas, where we celebrate the joy of the Christmas season. As the snow falls outside and the warmth of the holiday spirit fills our hearts, we invite you to gather your closest loved ones, your kids, grandkids, friends, or family. Get cozy by the fire, or snuggle up with a blanket and a cup of hot cocoa, and get ready for something truly special. Today we invite you to journey with us through a series of short stories that capture the essence of Christmas. These tales are filled with warmth, care, and loving generosity. So take a sip of that rich hot cocoa, nestle into your favorite spot, and let the glow of the firelight, or simply of your Bluetooth speaker, bring our stories to life. Welcome back to 6 Tales of Christmas. Today's story is a stitch in time, a yarn you won't soon forget, a tale about an ugly sweater that's as awkward as it is extraordinary. So grab your coziest blanket and let's dive into the world of the cool, ugly sweater. Once upon a Christmas season, in a little shop filled with yarn of every possible color, texture, and size, the great designer was hard at work. Spools of mismatched yarn danced between his fingers as he wove together a masterpiece unlike anything ever seen. A sweater. But this wasn't just any ordinary sweater. This was an ugly sweater. Bold, bright, and outrageously unique. It had zigzags, sparkly pom-poms, soft pastels, neon swirls, and earthy thick wool. The designer held it up to the light, smiling at his quirky charm.
Ah, this is unlike anything anyone could have imagined, but you are what I had in mind all along.
The ugly sweater had a big job ahead. It was going to clothe the most overlooked, misunderstood, and distraught in the community. Its threads were made from all sorts of yarn, a dazzling variety of threads from the community, delicate pastels from churches, merino wool and silk from businesses, fun pom-poms from outreach programs, and predictable gray polyester from social services. Each thread was unique, full of its own stories, struggles, and strengths. Now, the ugly sweater found many people in the community who needed its warmth. Many in poverty, those who were sick, newcomers, and many marginalized people. But the ugly sweater didn't just stop with them, as if they were Christmas community projects to be fixed. Actually, everyone in the land was living isolated, misunderstood, and disconnected from each other.
Hey!
One person said, running a hand along a colorful patch.
This thread reminds me of me.
And look at this one.
Another added.
It's so different from mine. But they somehow fit together.
I simply can't keep up with the fashion these days.
Mused another.
But I actually think I could pull this one off.
The ugly sweater felt its mismatched threads glow with pride. Each strand sparkled a flicker of curiosity, drawing people closer as they wondered how their yarn was part of this wild and wonderful design. Mesmerized by these woven mismatched wonders, young and old, rich and poor, and people of all ethnicities, abilities, political and religious backgrounds would pause, tilt their heads, and lean closer as the ugly sweater warmed those around them. Soon it wasn't just the youth aging out of care who benefited from its warmth, or the mom who was struggling to keep her family together, or the gentleman on the street corner begging for food. Before long, the whole community was eagerly awaiting their ugly sweaters too. Pastors felt awkward at first, realizing that they've always worn the same soft pastels. Pastel yarn was what they spun, so pastel yarn was what they knew to wear.
Well, what if we don't get along?
Whispered a pastor, tugging at his stiff collar.
Across the denominations, with community leaders who don't believe what I do. What if the community doesn't want us?
But as they donned their ugly sweaters from the pulpit and in their neighborhoods, the same phenomenon happened. People would pause, tilt their heads, and lean in closer. Now, social workers had never worn anything but their predictable gray polyesters, and typically wouldn't be caught dead in this ugly sweater fashion woven by church pastels.
Well, it hasn't always gone well in the past. What if churches slam the door in my face? Or they have hidden agendas to coerce my vulnerable clients into their church?
But as social workers dared to dazzle in their new ugly sweaters, people would pause, tilt their heads, and lean in closer. Social workers started to feel supported and warmly cared for,
Wow.
said a social worker.
Others do want to support me? Maybe there is a way to see those on my caseload supported too.
At first, business leaders didn't see much point in supporting an ugly sweater. They were used to writing checks, keeping the economy afloat, and leaving the warm, fuzzy, and gritty work to the helping professionals. But as they started to take their silk ties and luxurious merino wool jackets, these fabrics were masterfully woven into more ugly sweaters. Looking into the mirror at their wild new flamboyant knit fashion, they saw how their skills and savvy strengthened and supported other sectors in meaningful and life-giving ways. Jumping onto their Zoom calls and into high-stakes negotiations, people would pause, tilt their heads, and lean in closer. No longer feeling like ATM machines or distant philanthropists, these ugly sweater-wearing business leaders gushed to their clients, colleagues, and government officials about how they cared for their community. Make no mistake, the ugly sweater was awkward and challenging for the great designer to knit together. The sweater could feel the tension in its threads, stretched tight with fear and trepidation. Everyone worried they'd run into their own yarn and get hurt or be mocked or lose their identity. But the great designer masterfully knew how to work with each type of yarn, with their own quirks and insecurities, softening each of them to bring out their unique best.
There, my beautiful strands. Let your unique beauty, strength, and connection with each other be exactly what this sweater needs.
The more communities were brought together in these unprecedented ways, the greater the demand for ugly sweaters across the land. So the great designer called together teams of gritty, quirky, and skilled yarn gatherers who were passionately obsessed about bringing yarn together. These tenacious gatherers loved connecting with churches and social services and cultural groups and businesses and many hurting people to assure them that they were needed and valued, and to invite them to be part of something much bigger together. The great designer gave the yarn gatherers a particular assignment to gather more soft pastel yarn of the church, as this was in high demand to bring warmth and light into each sweater he knit.
I want you to remind them of their calling and who they were created to be in community.
Some churches were eager and ready, so excited and curious for the adventures they would be zigged and zagged into. They were wanting to collaborate, but needed a way to make meaningful connections. Oh, how they brought such timely joy and warm love into social worker offices, the street corners, and some of the people just hanging on by a thread. These soft pastel church fibers were unstoppable now. The more they gave of themselves into ugly sweaters, the more the pastel yarn seemed to flow. But oddly enough, this wasn't the case for other pretty pastel churches. Tightly wound together in neat calculated balls of yarn, some brushed the yarn gatherers off because they were too busy making their own pastel sweaters. Others stroked their chins judiciously and said they'd pray about it. Still others hardly raised a sleepy glance at the gatherer's invitation, as they were simply too comfortable, wrapped up in their cozy fibers. Perhaps they couldn't fathom how the great designer would ever have them venture away from their traditional solid pastel ensemble to be part of such a gaudy, ugly sweater. The yarn gatherers lovingly assured the church their soft pastels would become more beautiful and the fibers of their faith would not only remain steadfast, but actually grow softer and more resilient in the great designer's ugly sweater. No matter how hard it was, the great designer would never stop pursuing all the pastel yarn in the land, inviting them to be woven into a wilder design they were created for. It wasn't just the pastels who had trepidations and fears. Every single type of yarn felt it too, ingrained into the very fibers of their being. But how could they deny the awkward marvel and bizarre beauty of the ugly sweater? How could they dismiss the way these woven wonders were changing the very fabric of their community? There was no way around it. The ugly sweater was warming people up to each other so well, it became the coolest in the land. So if you see someone sporting an ugly sweater this Christmas, remember the great designer is still at work, making awkward cool again. Pause, tilt your head, and lean in closer. You might be surprised by the beauty found in the ugly sweater.
This Christmas, you can help warm up communities with an ugly sweater. Visit CareImpactChristmas.com to gift virtual ugly sweaters for everyone on your list. Care Impact knows that working across sectors isn't easy. Different values and priorities can clash. But real change happens in these awkward spaces, and we're here for it. Care Impact specializes in knitting churches with the most diverse community sectors so that you can build vibrant and trust-based collaboration. One virtual ugly sweater of $100 warms an entire gathering of diverse community stakeholders, ensuring no one is forgotten or left in the cold. Because when diverse people come together, people do pause, tilt their head, and lean in closer. Help us reach 80 ugly sweaters this Christmas, each a bold step toward healing and collaboration. And here's the best part. Every dollar you give will be matched until December 31st, doubling your impact. Give the wildest and coziest gift of the season at CareImpactChristmas.com.